Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Editorial. Last year, August, a aircraft had crashed in Kozhikode airport, which took 21 lives. Now, if you remember, we had called Captain Mohan Ranganathan, aviation expert, aviation safety expert, to our show, and I had spoken to him about the crash, and he had categorically told us that two airports, Mangalore and Kozhikode, were pretty difficult airports for landing. Now, on Saturday last, the Aircraft Accident Investigative Bureau came out with a report. And this report says that the crash in Kozhikode happened primarily because of pilot error. Let's understand more about this report. Let's talk to Captain Mohan Ranganathan once again and figure out what he feels about this report. Let's get right into the show. Captain Mohan Ranganathan, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining my program. And sir, the AAIB finally has come out with this report. That is the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau has come out with this report. And primarily what they're saying is it is pilot error.
See, if you take all the accident reports in India, we all say that if the pilot is alive, hang him. If he is dead, bury him. So for them, a dead man doesn't talk. So it makes it very easy for them to blame. Yes, I don't deny there's a very high element of pilot error in this. But what they have not highlighted are the serious failures by airport authority, the DGCA, and the airline. And if you ask me, all of them are equally culpable, and they're more culpable because after the Mangalore crash, that report itself was a garbage report where the Air Marshal Gokhale and his team covered up these people, except the pilot. I would also say that I hope the Supreme Court of India wakes up now, because prior to the Mangalore crash, an activist named Leo Saldana had filed a writ in the Karnataka High Court that the lay of the land in Mangalore is not suitable for a runway, and if an aircraft overshoots, they will plunge down 100 meters and you'll have a lot of death. And Supreme Court, it went right up to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gave an order for the PIL saying that the government shall comply with all the rules and regulations. The Mangalore crash, actually, the government did not comply with all the rules and regulations. And 2013, there was another PIL filed. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court gave the entire case file to Ministry of Civil Aviation to assess if it is a worthwhile case. In fact, my uncle, Justice Krishnaya, was furious when he saw that report. And so the same thing is happening here. They blame the pilot. Yes, he's done very big mistakes, but they have covered up serious failures of the DGCA because the airport authority and DGCA have confirmed that all the recommendations of the Mangalore crash have been complied with. They have not. And if you go through the report, some of the things which are very, very damaging. Now, let me tell you about, they said that they were waiting for an accredited member, NTSB, to give their findings. Now, NTSB will not, nor will Boeing. They are only observers in this. And as far as I know, NTSB has given a report against the national report only in the case of Silk Air crash because it affected an American entity, Boeing, because it was coming as a failure on the part of the Boeing. So NTSB came out with a counter and proved that no, it was pilot suicide. But in all the other cases, when it doesn't involve blame on an American entity, NTSB will just blindly accept what is given. And that's a fact. And so will ICAO. They are not going to counter anything which is given. They will just file it and say India has submitted the report. Now, let me give you an example, the similarities, not just the pilot error, but the fire, a crash and fire rescue. Now, in the case of Mangalore crash, the city fire brigade head had said that it took them more than 11 minutes to reach the crash site. That was not even mentioned in the final report of Mangalore crash. And in that, the COI had said the crash tenders reached in 3 minutes 55 seconds. There are two hairpin bends and it was wet and narrow path. Even Schumacher or Hamilton could not have done it in 3 minutes 55 seconds. And when I did the audit, I timed and they took 10 minutes 42 seconds. But the final report said that they reached in 3 minutes 55 seconds. And the crash tender had actually got bogged down just outside the airport. And that was all covered up. Now, take for instance in Calicut crash. Now, in the report in page 53, the airport authority says that one of the things which they are supposed to do is aircraft familiarization training. And they have sent emails after emails to DGCA to arrange, and they don't even get a reply. And in the report, it says that the DGCA safety surveillance audit, that aircraft familiarization training for the firemen have been done. But in the accident investigation inquiry, when they were interviewed, they said we have not done it. And it is there in page 53. Still, in the end, there's nothing mentioned about the fault of DGCA. Both DGCA and Airport Authority have covered this up. And the other thing, 5 years back, and in 2011, we had pointed out that the perimeter road is unfit for these crash tenders to reach the crash site if an aircraft overshoots runway 10. And in 2016, there was an audit done. And one of their own crash tenders, while doing a high-speed check with a DGCA safety official on board, crashed and it was written off. And they can't reach the crash site. But all this is not mentioned as a reason, as a failure of the system. And DGCA has been licensing the airport. ICAO had mandated that you need a strip of 150 meters on either side of the center line. Calicut has only 75 meters, and you're supposed to have safety measures. Still, they want to fudge the numbers and make it a code 4E runway when it's only a code 4C runway. It's unfit for wide body because you don't have the side strip. If an aircraft goes off the side, it'll be a major disaster. And your crash tenders can't reach because the perimeter road is wet. Now, all these are factors which are not mentioned as the cause or rather the reason for the crash and the deaths. 21 people are dead today, but at least because these facts are mentioned, a good lawyer can file for unlimited damage now because negligences can be proved. Now, you take all the overruns like Mangalore crash, several other things. It's the same airline. It's the same kind of error, high-end fast approach, landing long, overshoot or undershoot. And yet the DGCA keeps clearing. And even in the audit, they found several things which are missing. But they don't mention all that. They only blame the pilot. Yes, the pilot has made a serious error. And you spoke about the windshield wiper. And the first approach, he says the wiper is not working. He had three options. First thing, he should have diverted. He had enough fuel to go to the furthest diversion point, which is Trichy. Plenty of fuel. Trichy weather was clear. Bangalore was clear. He could have gone to Cochin or even Kannur. He had enough fuel to reach Trichy. That was his first option. The second option is that he could have used the autopilot on the ILS. On a single channel approach, you can fly it all the way down to 50 feet. And if he can't sight the runway at 50 feet, he had no business to make the approach. But he made the mistake of switching off the autopilot at 200 feet. And that is where all the errors started. Until then, he was on the path, correct path. But if he had continued right down to 50 feet, he could have still saved the situation. And the third one is when your wiper is unserviceable, you should have handed over controls to your first officer for the landing. He is a trained first officer. Your check reports, the Air India Express, the DGCA will confirm that he's a qualified first officer who's clear to accept takeoffs and landing, which means this captain did not even have confidence to give his co-pilot the landing. Co-pilot's wiper was working perfectly. So these were the only three options available to the captain, and he didn't use any of them. He opted to fly. So that is, if you look at his training record, it shows that under stress, he makes mistakes. Here he was under tremendous stress, not just because of the weather. If you read the report, they say that Air India Express had just one captain in Calicut and 28 co-pilots. And he was required to operate the next day. So he was in a hurry to get back and land because his duty time would have come into the play. And so the stress of pleasing the company bosses was acting on him to rush through the approach. Let's take the Mangalore crash first. There, the report had confirmed that the captain was pulled up for what the airline called hard landing, though he was well within the Boeing definition of a hard landing. He was reprimanded, and people say he was humiliated by the head of safety. So he was going for a smooth landing. That is why he ducked down with a high rate of descent, leveled off, and he was floated with power to make a smooth landing. Now, if you look at the Calicut crash, at 200 feet, he was stabilized. Then the report says he was increased his descent rate to 1500 feet per minute. Then again, which means he has ducked down below the glide path. And then he has opened power, which is a cardinal error. He was already landing with a tailwind, and it'll be visible on his primary flight display. The wind component is shown with an arrow and the speed. He will know exactly what his ground speed is, which means he is frozen there. And like the co-pilot is telling him that go around, he doesn't respond. Now, in safety parlance, this is a classic example of what we call pressonitis. Once you are sort of frozen on something, he's seen the runway, because at 700 feet, he says runway in sight, runway visual. So he is focused, frozen there. In his mind, I've seen the runway, I must put it on because I've got a flight tomorrow. At the same time, he ducks down, he disconnects the autopilot, he doesn't trust his co-pilot, he doesn't trust the autopilot, which could have done a fantastic job. And he ducks down, and then he opens power because I think he wanted to do a smooth touchdown. In Calicut, in the initial part, it is a upslope, and then it is a steep downslope. Now, because he had the extra speed and the extra thrust, he went past that hump, and then it is downslope. Now he's floating and floating, and when he touches down, again, he doesn't trust the auto brakes, which are very good on the Boeing. He applies manual maximum braking, and then takes the reverser immediately, which is fine. But in 2 seconds, he cancels the reverser, which means he would have felt that there's not enough runway. So in his mind, he almost wanted to take off. Then he must have recalled what happened in Mangalore. So again, he takes the reversers out. But then once the engine is spooled down, it takes 8 seconds for it to spool up. And by the time he was out of the runway and crashed, you see? So it is almost a similar kind of actions by the same airline, the same set of pilots, the captain, same errors, and one resulted in 158 lives gone, and here it's 21 lives gone, and
Correct.
several others seriously injured.
Correct.
So
Sir,
it is a serious system error, not just the
absolutely.
DGCA and Airport Authority, but also the airline.
Sir, I that's the question I wanted to ask you. There is a lot of similarity between the Mangalore airport and the Kozhikode airport, right, sir?
Yeah,
And Mangalore airport, we saw a crash where 158 people lost their lives. And in Kozhikode airport, now we saw a crash which 21 people lost their lives. Technically, that means that the aviation authorities were aware that these airports were dangerous, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Even after them being aware of the fact that these airports were dangerous, I mean, how could they allow these airports to be operational?
You see, here you have to blame the politicians also, because you in a Kerala and Mangalore and Calicut has a very high Gulf connection. Now you have a fantastic airport, Cochin, and it's a couple of hour drive to Calicut or to Mangalore. But they want an airport there, and they'll like even now they're talking of extension of the runway, acquiring land. There is no space. It is like a table. And how are you going to build the airport there? And this is unfit for any wide body aircraft. And even in aircraft like 737 or 320, if the conditions are not maintained, it is not safe. In Calicut, only 21 died because after the Mangalore crash from the Civil Aviation Safety Advisory Council, we fought and got the extended portion, what they call the runway and safety area, filled up. Both Mangalore and Calicut had these concrete pillars sticking out for the ILS. If they had not filled it up, this aircraft would have met the same fate as the Mangalore one, because what caused the fire there is not because it went down. Because when the wing hit, the fuel spilt on the hot engines and it caught fire. I had written this in 2010. I wrote a letter with details that runway 10, it requires just a simple error and it's going to result in a crash. They ignored it.
Tell me, as a pilot yourself, did you find it safe to land your aircraft in Mangalore airport or a Kozhikode airport?
Let me tell you, like Mangalore or Calicut, like I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, but the way my instructor taught me or I teach people is you fly the aircraft, don't let the aircraft fly you. A good pilot who has aircraft under control can land. But a pilot who is underconfident, who is not sure, will find it difficult. It is dangerous. Now, you can't expect everyone to maintain a very high standard. So all your operations, the DGCA and the airline should consider is you cater for an average pilot. So if you think this is not safe, like if you remember in the 80s when we were in Indian Airlines, to operate to Mangalore or Srinagar or Port Blair, you have to have 500 hours command with no accident in a record, no failures in your checks. So they had mandatory requirements or the experience level to operate to these places. Like if you had been to the old Hong Kong airport in Kai Tak, only a few were allowed, and that too after some special checks. Here, everyone is allowed. Like if I tell you, you'll stop flying because you have captains who have 2,500 hours experience, and you'll have a co-pilot who comes from a Cessna with 250 hours, and you're flying on wing and prayer.
So, are you saying, as a layman, I don't know who's who's sitting inside the cockpit. I don't know what kind of pilot that person is or how much flying hours does he have. But so therefore, next time I go to airport like Mangalore or airport like Kozhikode, I should pray hard before I sit inside the aircraft and hope that I land properly, isn't it?
You see, DGCA is supposed to be a regulator who is supposed to control all the standards. But here, we don't have a regulator. We have a facilitator. Like if there's a one call from the ministry or some big politician, they comply. And they're all towing the lines of airline owners because no one wants a flight to be cancelled. So for them, it is all money. Look at all these politicians who are fighting just immediately after the Calicut crash. They wanted Calicut to be opened immediately, even for wide body, because for them it is the thing. Oh, no flight is wide body aircraft is coming. Now there's another point in this report. It says that the brake sensor was not working, even though it didn't affect the brakes, the right brake sensor. But it was for more than a year. Now, whose fault is it? They are supposed to have the digital flight data recorder monitoring on a regular basis. If you find that it is not working for 1 year, your DGCA is going and doing safety audits of the airline, and they have not even pulled them up. It is mentioned in the report, and the AAIB does not think that airline maintenance is at fault. So the whole thing is covered up.
So there are 10 points that they have spoken about in the report. The 10 points are one is pilot error. The second point, they say talk about the systemic failure. Third, no briefing on landing distance. Fourth is faulty windshield wiper, which we spoke about. Sixth, no diversion, which we spoke about. Again, that will be a pilot error, isn't it? Seventh, approach with faulty wipers. Again, that would be tantamounting to a pilot error. Eighth, adverse weather condition. Ninth, no risk assessment. And 10th is safety compromised. Okay, most of it are it's attributed to the pilot error. Nowhere is it written that the DGCA knew that the Kozhikode airport, like the Mangalore airport, was an airport which is quite difficult to land. Nowhere it is written.
They should have mentioned, even though at least they've been transparent enough to highlight. If you look at the Mangalore report, they hid a lot of things. But at least here, some of these things have. So the reason for the delay is because they would have gone, it will go to the ministry, and one Babu will check if all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and any sentence which could be in the findings, they would have deleted those lines. And that is how the final report comes. All the delay is because of the vetting which is going on to ensure that, because who runs the aviation in India? It is the Ministry of Civil Aviation. So the entire blame, and I would, as I said earlier, I would blame the Supreme Court. I mean, right to life is as important as any other thing that they are taking. Now, there's the same airline, same error, same kind of runway, and lives are lost. And if the Supreme Court still thinks that the Ministry of Civil Aviation is capable of ensuring safety, God help you.
So now let me come to my last question, sir. Sir, had this happened in the United States, the compensation for people who passed away, for people, even the survivors, would have run into millions of dollars, isn't it?
They would have been taken to the cleaner.
Absolutely correct. But somewhere down the line, here we are talking about around 25 lakhs for people who have deceased, isn't it?
Provided there is no negligence proved. Here you can prove that there was negligence. Then it becomes like your class action suit in US. Here, if the judiciary is not controlled, I'm hoping that the new CGI controls the thing, that life is important. There is negligence, we can prove the negligence, and I would say that each of them, including those who survived, they can demand compensation for the trauma, because what they went through, and it'll haunt them every time they fly, and it'll haunt the families. So I think they should sue the airline and the Ministry of Civil Aviation and take them to the cleaners.
Sir, does the report show negligence per se?
If you go through the thing, like not in the findings, but if you go through everything, you can prove, like page 53, you can show DGCA audit, they fudged the report. When the training was not done, they've said the training is done. You look at page 40 and 41, there are diagrams there, runway and safety area, where he says before the Mangalore crash and after the Mangalore crash. The two of us from KESAC, we did the inspection. what they call the runway and safety area for runway 28, beyond the end of the runway was a drop of 8 feet, and then what they call, if an aircraft had overshot, it would have broken in two. And it was cleared by DGCA. We fought and got that filled. At least one good thing we did from CASAC was we got the two ends of Mangalore and Calicut filled up so that there is no concrete sticking out. There is no, it was smooth surface.
Correct.
So at least that much we were able to achieve.
Correct.
But unless you have an independent, this is not an independent investigation. This is a doctored investigation.
Captain, how many more airports like Bangalore and Kozhikode in India?
Jammu and Patna. They are not tabletop. They are unfit for any jet aircraft like 320s or 737. They are fit only for the turboprops, where the runway does not have runway and safety area, which is mandatory. There are obstacles on the approach. The DGCA and the ministry know about it because from CASAC we had given very graphic with photographs, details I've given. They know. But again, here, what I hope the Chief Justice takes this suo motu and holds them accountable.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for talking to me. It was indeed a pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome.